Bombardier, Embraer, McDonnell Douglas, Airbus, and Boeing all make great passenger airline jets. And I've flown many over my 17-year career. In fact, I have 6 different type ratings. Today, I'm going to give you a few of the features of each one that I liked, I didn't like. And at the end, I'll tell you what my favorite of my 6 type ratings is. Hello, my name is Darren. I'm a dad. I'm an airline pilot. I'm a husband of a scientist. And I'm an airline pilot, right? I like flying airplanes. And people have lots of misconceptions about the current aircraft in the sky. Some will say they're flown by computers. Some will say they're real airline pilots fly those kind of planes. I've flown multiple aircraft types. Started flying back in 2007, and my first type rating was in the CRJ type aircraft. I only flew the 700 series of the variant of that aircraft. They make a 100, 200, 700, 900, and 1000. It's just how long the plane is or how many seats it has. There's also some sub-variants in there as well, but I only flew the 700. Now, the 700 was a sweet spot from Bombardier, or for the CRJ series. It was overpowered. The 1 and 200, I'm told, was kind of underpowered. The 9 and 10 are just kind of right powered. The 700 was so powerful. It had around 14,000 pounds of thrust from memory, 70 seats initially. Now they have fewer because they have first class in them. The max takeoff weight was only 75,000 pounds. So you had a very high power to weight ratio going on. It's one of the few airliners that are allowed to certified to fly in and out of Aspen, Colorado. Reason being, it's so overpowered. It can get in there, lose an engine at the worst possible time, and escape the way it came. Most airliners can't do it. The 777 can't do it. The Boeing 737 in normal passenger configuration cannot do it. But the CRJ 700, it can. Now, it was a very quiet airplane. The windows were sealed. It had an escape hatch up top. The avionics were very good. Didn't have auto throttles, but was really needed. It was a good all-around jet, very smooth ride. It handled turbulence very, very well. It went high, it went fast. Now, it did have some negatives. If my memory serves me correct, the 700 had very stiff legs. So if you wanted to grease it on, good luck. It was not easy. It also had a weird little, I think it was a stab disconnect switch right at the top of the yoke that if you were to just touch it for like a few milliseconds, it could disable the system, if I remember correctly. And they kind of called it the USA Today switch because it was like if the captain were flying along and not breaking the rules, and taking the newspaper and just flicked it over and it just graced that switch, you could have a big problem on your hands. Beyond that, it was an all-around great aircraft to fly. I really did enjoy flying that airplane. I flew that plane as first officer, and that was my first aircraft I flew as captain a few years later on. Now, after that aircraft, I flew the Embraer 145. Now, this is a jet made by Embraer, been down in Brazil. It was a great overall jet. It was a small plane. It was 1x2 seating. It was just okay powered. So compared to the CRJ, I think it had like 11,000 pounds of thrust, maybe 10,000 pounds of thrust, but max takeoff weight was around 50,000 pounds. So it wasn't as good as power to weight ratio as the CRJ was. It was okay to fly. It had some kind of ram horn yokes, not the normal yoke, kind of like a bicycle kind of thing. It was kind of a weird yoke system, but it was a good overall jet. It couldn't go that fast, couldn't go that high, it can go really slow, but it was fun to fly. Mostly because we flew it to a lot of small airports that didn't have any control towers. So for me, it's kind of fun flying in somewhere and just doing my own thing for landing and for takeoff. So and then also at that airline I flew this aircraft for, it was a crew of 3, and for the most part, we stuck together the entire trip. So all 3 of us flew together for 4 days, and we all got to know each other. It was more of a kind of a let's get this done teamwork kind of a feel on that aircraft. Now, it wasn't perfect. The 145 series of aircraft had the exact same nose cone as the Embraer 120, which is a turboprop airplane that flew much slower than the 145. That meant you're flying much faster in this turboprop nose cone. It was loud. It was very, very loud inside. You had to leave your headset on the entire time if you want to keep your hearing. If compared to the CRJ, on the CRJ you can take your headset off pretty easily above 18,000 feet. In the Embraer 145, you were a fool to do so. It also had some other annoying quirks. When you went through icing conditions, it had automatic anti-ice. Well, it would turn on the anti-ice even if you're going through a small layer of cloud, and it would kill all of your performance. Versus on the CRJ I just talked about, it had manual anti-ice. It was kind of ironic that the Canadair plane, the Bombardier made in Canada, had manual anti-ice and no feet air, meaning your feet would freeze in the middle of winter. But the Embraer, made in Brazil, they're like, hey, we don't know what ice is, we hate ice, so it's all automatic anti-ice. And we'll keep your feet nice and warm, had nice warm feet air. Very different mindsets between Bombardier and Embraer. Also on the Embraer, it had an annoying quirk where if you were going 251 knots below 10,000 feet, it would go high speed, high speed. Because in many parts of the world, below 10,000 feet, the fastest you can go is 250 knots. Well, if you're going 251, or even bounced up there for a second, it would go high speed, high speed. Many of the Embraer pilots would say hi Steve. They kind of like hi Steve. But that was an annoying quirk as well. But otherwise, great plane to fly. A 145 series of aircraft for about 5 years, only as first officer. Now, after the 145, I did go back to the CRJ as my first upgrade to captain, but then my next type rating was in the 175 as captain. 175 is one of the most popular regional jets in use right now in the United States. It's a good overall jet. Front and rear lavatories. You can stand up in the cabin. You can put your rollerboards in the overhead bins, unlike the previous two aircraft. It feels like a big plane, except when you walk into the flight deck, Embraer has this thing where they have steps into the flight deck. So as a captain, I would walk on the plane all nice and proud, and then go on the flight deck and have to lean over to get into my seat. That was kind of weird. But otherwise, 175, it's an okay plane to fly. It had the same engines as the CRJ 700, but the 175 was a worse performing airplane as far as fuel economy and power to weight ratio and overall performance. The CRJ was better all around as far as fuel economy and performance than this 175 was. 175 looks cooler, and lots of new pilots want to fly a 175 versus a CRJ because it has engines under the wings. But to me, the 175 was just an okay plane to fly. Yeah, it had auto throttles, it had VNAV, it was a more advanced regional jet. It was quiet up front. It had the nice Embraer perks of nice warm feet air, automatic anti-ice, still had the weird kind of yoke system going on. But it was just an all-around okay jet to fly. And I flew this one only as captain. Now, my first mainline aircraft was the MD-80, the McDonnell Douglas 80, also known as the DC-9. This was I went from the 175 to the MD-80, so I went several steps backwards in technology. Because the previous three aircraft I flew had glass flight decks, right? So I was used to glass everywhere. The MD-80 had two pieces of glass. This is my this ADI, my artificial horizon, and then I had a little nav display below it. Everything else was dials, kind of clocks going on. So it was my first real round dial airplane. I mean, I flew on 172s and Piper Seminoles when I first started to fly, but this was a lot more dial, so to speak, than the previous aircraft I flew were. It was a busy airplane to fly. Now, when I got hired at my mainline carrier, I had a choice between the Airbus, the Boeing, and then the MD-80. I chose the MD-80. Now, part of it was nostalgia, and most of it was because the MD-80 had to be based home in Dallas. The other aircraft I had to commute to LA or New York, and I'm like, I'll fly the MD-80. Now, the MD-80 was a great plane to fly. It was a great hand-flying airplane. But as a first officer, it was a very busy plane to fly. When we left the gate, I never stopped moving until we got to takeoff. There was so much to do as a first officer, so many settings to check, dials to move, levers to pull before we got to the runway. It was a very busy plane to fly. I enjoyed it, but it was very, very busy. Up front, it was extremely quiet. As a rear engine, long aircraft, we could barely even hear the engines. On startup, you hear a little pop, and that's about it. Now the seals on the windows were kind of interesting. If you had de-iced the airplane, you got good at putting napkins into the seals of the window to avoid being sprayed by de-icing fluid. That was a thing. Now, once we got pressurized, the seals would kind of do their job. On the ground, you would see water coming through and de-icing fluid coming through those seals. Otherwise, it was a great plane to fly. It was very busy. Again, like turning on the anti-ice, to turn on the wings and the tail anti-ice was 7 steps with multiple levers and switches being thrown for wings and tail anti-ice. Versus on the Airbus, it's just 3 buttons. On the Boeings, it's all automatic. But yeah, it was a busy plane to fly at the MD-80. That one I only flew as a first officer. My next type rating was the Airbus 320 series. I had a choice again going to the 737 or the Airbus. I spent enough time in the 737 flight deck jump seat. I want no part of that airplane. It's a very cramped flight deck for me. The Airbus, this is my first true fly-by-wire airplane, my first side stick airplane. I was nervous about that, right? I'm going from an MD-80 to this Airbus, so they're both actually pretty old airplanes. The MD-80 is much older, but it's a very different mindset. I really love flying that Airbus. The side stick was it's very natural to fly. Contrary to popular belief, it's not a flying computer. You are an actual pilot, and whatever I do is being put into the actual aircraft. Lots of people think it's a flying computer and that you're not doing anything. You are, and you can still make mistakes. That's like any other airplane. It's a very logical flight deck. It's a very comfortable flight deck to fly in. You walk in, there's plenty of room up front for 4 pilots and all their bags. It's very quiet. The overhead panel makes sense. All the layout of the aircraft, for the most part, is very ergonomic. It's a great place to spend multiple hours per day. My favorite variant is the 319. She is short and sporty. The 319 wingspan is wider and the plane is long. So a big old wing on a short body. It has great hot and high performance. Like a human being, if you go somewhere that's really high and it's hot outside and you go outside and run, you don't perform as well. Same thing for airplanes, right? So the 319 was great and high because it had that big old wing, so it had plenty of power and lift to get up and out of these high and hot airports. Conversely, though, the 321, much longer body with almost the exact same size wing, very similar size wing. The 321 is not a hot and high performer. The 321 needs a lot more runway to get off the ground. It's a great long distance performer, but not hot and high. But beyond that, Airbus, again, it's a great plane to fly. I mean, I give it a lot of crap and flack before I flew it. I really enjoy flying that airplane. It is great to hand fly. And the last aircraft I'll talk about is a Boeing 777, giant airplane. Over 300 passengers we can hold on the 300 variant. It's big. It's a big girl. It's a traditional yoke. I found the yoke smaller than I thought it would be for a big old airplane. But it's a great plane to fly. It's a great plane to hand fly. Much like the Airbus, though, it is fly-by-wire. People find that amusing when they say fly-by-wire airplane. They think Airbus, but so is 777. 777 is a very comfortable plane to fly as well. Plenty of room up front for all the 4 pilots on a long flight. The overhead panel, not as ergonomic as the Airbus, but very, very good. There is a lot of automation in 777. People think a Boeing is a real pilot's plane. There's a whole lot of automation on the 777. The Boeing 777 is a great Boeing Airbus, as some people call it. There's a lot that I don't have to do that is just done for me. Starting the engine is very similar to the Airbus. I turn one switch, I flip one lever, and it all starts, just like the Airbus. Now, I do like the 777 has an electronic checklist on it. On every aircraft I've talked about so far and I've flown, we have a paper checklist. And that can lead to errors and missing things. It's very rare, right? It's extremely rare. But on the 777, it's all electronic. So we have to either check the item off or the plane can sense that we've done something correctly and check it off for us. It is a great thing to have. Walking on 777, all I have to have to legally fly the airplane is my iPad and my certificates. There are no manuals. I carry 0 manuals for the 777. Versus on previous fleets, I carried some kind of manual with me, paper manual, to be able to legally fly the airplane. Now, the 777 is very quiet up front, but it does have some quirks that I don't really like a whole bunch. On every other aircraft I've flown, including the MD-80, they had these little red and white like balls we could use in the middle of the flight deck to line up and make sure we're sitting high enough. And that was a way of always sitting in the same height on every single plane. 777 doesn't have that. And I find myself, when I get to the right position, I think I'm sitting too high. And the yoke is almost in my lap. It's very weird to fly a 777 as far as how high you really need to sit to be able to see everything. The avionics are pretty good, but they're not perfect. Like on the Airbus products, it shows if you're descending on a VNAV path and you're off the path. You're a little high or a little low. The Airbus products will show you where you're going to re-intercept the proper path. The Boeing just tells you how much higher or lower you are. The Boeing, even with all its automation, it does push more stuff onto the pilot. This is for a quick example. On the Airbus product, it wants to know the temperature at where you're landing at, the barometric pressure, the wind. It wants to know all this data to help formulate how much flaps, or how much distance you're going to need, and what speed you're going to be flying, right, for landing. The Boeing, all it wants to know is what kind of flaps you're using, 25 or 30. That's all it wants to know. It's just different. Ergonomic-wise, it's sitting in a seat. It is pretty comfortable. I do like having. I'm a very cold and natured person, and I can change the temperature on my side of the flight deck, just my side, by adding like called shoulder heat. So I turn on the shoulder heat switch, and it pushes extra hot air over to my shoulder to help me stay a little warm. I also have heated floors as well to keep my feet nice and toasty on a long flight. I do fly the 200 and 300 variant right now, only as a first officer, and they do fly differently. But overall, I do fly like flying a 777. It is a great plane to fly. It's a very large plane, but very comfortable plane to fly overall. So who's going to be the winner? What is my favorite type rating of those 6 planes I have mentioned? Well, believe it or not, it is the Embraer 145. It is the safest airliner in the world that's over 20 years old. Right now, the 145 series aircraft is over 25 years old with 0 fatalities by any airline in the world, excluding the one that Russia blew up last year. Beyond that, no one has ever died on an Embraer 145 product. 145, 135, or 140, ever. No one's ever died on one. It's a very stable airplane. It can go really slow. Just for example, if you're a pilot, it might blow your mind. You take off on a 145 and just be fat, dumb, and happy and press the button for automation called flight level change. You do 240 knots to 10,000 feet. Then 270 to Mach 0.56. You can do Mach 0.56 all the way to 370, about 180 knots indicated, and you're not going to fall out of the sky. Conversely, every plane I've flown can't go that slow. If I try to do Mach 5.6 in a 777, Airbus, or CRJ, we're falling out of the sky. We're going to stall. 145 handles it just fine. Nice trailing landing gear, easy to have smooth landings. It is a great overall performing aircraft, and I truly enjoy flying that airplane. I did not enjoy my pay rate flying the airplane, but I truly enjoyed flying that plane. So there you have it, a little bit different kind of video for me this week. I'll go back to my normal trip review videos probably next week. This is coming out on Thanksgiving. Hope you have a great Thanksgiving if you're in the United States, or I even think even in Japan, they celebrate Thanksgiving. Otherwise, I appreciate your support. If you can like, subscribe, it does a lot. A lot of you guys just see my videos and don't subscribe. Just click the subscribe button. It does really help me as a very new content creator here on YouTube. As always, have a great day, and thank you for stopping by.